Are you sometimes lonely? Or have you ever felt deeply lonely to the core? That's one of the worst feelings that we humans can have. We sadly live in a time where loneliness is very widespread. I've come across a quote by the famous Franz Kafka, an author who died young. He wrote this as a 20-year-old to his friend Oskar Pollack. Aren't we all abandoned, like lost kids in a forest? When you stand before me and look at me, what do you know of the pain that is in me, and what do I know about your pain? And if I were to fall to my knees and cry out before you, what more would you know of me than you know about hell, when someone says it's hot or terrifying there? If only for this reason, we should be so reverent, so thoughtful, and loving to one another as towards the gates of hell. What a quote. Nobody can look inside another person. Kafka says, even if someone explains how they are feeling, how it feels for me will still be completely different. And I once saw a picture with the title, "This is what depression looks like." And under it were, I think, 20 smiling, very attractive men and women. People like Marilyn Monroe. They were all people who deep down were lonely, battling extremely painful loneliness, who were depressed and sad. I have a theory that there is not a single person who does not know loneliness. I know loneliness. I can even remember situations from my childhood. Once I was playing with friends and I realized those two had made a time to meet up and I wasn't invited. And they had closed the door and I was left alone. It was an awful situation. Maybe you've experienced this too. And even if it was years ago, we remember stuff like that. These things sit in us deeply. But not all of us show it. Some people think you're always the life of the party, you're always surrounded by friends. I also have a life that is filled with people. I have family and many people around me, but still I experience the feeling of loneliness. And I think it's often the people who are most popular, who look most happy or successful, who have their hidden secrets, maybe even stronger than others. And I don't know what you are going through right now. I'm making this video to pass on a few things how we can maybe deal with loneliness. There's not so much we can do, because it's a deep and painful human mystery. That we were born of a mother, yet alone. It's an experience the baby has to bear on their own. And one day we will also die alone. Even if loved ones are hopefully near us, there's that point in us humans which is lonely. But lonely isn't the same as alone. You can be alone and not feel lonely. Maybe you've experienced this before. Perhaps you went on a hike and were alone somewhere but felt really good. And you can also be lonely even though people are around you. You can even have a partner and many friends and be at a party yet feel so lonely. So loneliness isn't mainly about the question, are there people around me? Instead, it clearly is something deeper. Most of the time, we don't want to look loneliness in the eye, so we keep ourselves busy. So what do you do when you feel lonely? Maybe you watch Netflix or TV or call a friend, or you go to the fridge and eat something. Or do you play video games? Or do you keep yourself so busy that you never feel this feeling? The problem is, it catches up with us eventually. This running away from loneliness makes loneliness even worse. I find it interesting that, I'll put it this way, the great spiritual paths of our world all teach about dealing with this. It's interesting that, if I understand correctly, in all or most religions, loneliness and being alone has a deep meaning. So a voluntary stepping into being alone. For me, there are two differences. I'm not a Buddhist, so it might be that I'm mistaken, but Buddhism has put great focus on separating yourself from being dependent on people or the world. And through meditation and loneliness and being alone, you are supposed to find deeper peace. But there seems to be more a tendency that our desire for a human counterpart, it's seen more as an illusion or distraction, if I understand correctly. With Jesus, we have a similar element. He voluntarily goes into loneliness to be alone. But in Christianity, it's less a belief that it's an illusion. We actually believe that our desire for other people isn't an illusion, but deeply entrenched in being human, because we are made for relationships. So I'm assuming that perspective from now on. We humans are different than rocks or animals. Humans can deal with almost anything. But loneliness is an exception. That's extremely hard for us. We are really made to have a person across from us. And all the more confusing that religions and spiritual paths and even Jesus are about choosing a path of being alone. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Jesus. Before he started acting as a preacher and healer, he went for 40 days into the desert. I don't know if you've ever been to the desert. The desert is a place of loneliness per se. No people live there. You have no distraction. You're completely thrown onto yourself. I've spent a few days in a desert once. I don't know if you've done that yet. It's frightening, because when we're all alone, we're unprotected. You need other people to survive in a desert. It's a dangerous place. And Jesus voluntarily goes into this desert. And the interesting thing is, we read in the New Testament of the Bible that Jesus also fasted. And at the end of the 40 days, he was really hungry. And then the tempter comes to him. And the tempter says to him, "Hey, if you are truly the Son of God, if you are truly the Son of God, you think you're the Son of God? Oh sure, God is your Father, haha. Then turn those stones into bread. Jump from the top of the temple so everyone sees how great you are. Or I'll make a deal with you. You can have all the riches of this world and be all-powerful." And the interesting thing is, Jesus doesn't give in to these deals. I find two things interesting. The first is when you're lonely and have emotional need. In Jesus' case, it's deeply physical. He's simply hungry. But also when your soul is hungry, loneliness can hurt like physical hunger. Think about what you do next. What are your offers? Which voices come up? What do you need to do? And they aren't always good voices. Truly, when you're most vulnerable, the most exposed and lonely, those are the moments where we become open to offers that aren't good, that don't encourage life. And it's notable how Jesus answers. He answers all three offers by pointing to his relationship to God. He says, "No, I don't need to turn stones into bread because I live off the words of my Father. Man does not live on bread alone. I live on this relationship to God. I don't need the riches of the world. I only bow before my Heavenly Father." So Jesus stays connected in this relationship to his Father. That's why he leaves the desert situation strengthened. And then he can do miracles in Galilee and pass on powerful things for people's lives. And that's a perspective I'd like to have. I'd like to come out of the times where I'm feeling low, where I'm lonely, where I feel vulnerable, and where voices come that aren't good. I'd like to leave those places in a way where I later become a comfort and support for others. And that's a perspective I'd like to invite you to. 3 thoughts, 3 points. The first is quite simple, totally simple, but not unimportant. Namely, feeling loneliness won't kill you. The impulse to run whenever something hurts, when I'm lonely, I need to get out, I can't stand it. That impulse is deceiving. It's not true. That's the impulse where you start numbing yourself, getting drunk, addicted to work, but it's not good. To feel loneliness can feel like falling into nothingness, especially if you have a history with being alone your whole life. It can be very difficult, but to run from it is even worse. So feeling lonely won't kill you. You can get through it, but only one day at a time. The more you try to be distracted and to run, this goes for all hard times, the worse the thing gets. Sometimes you need to sit that loneliness down next to you and say, okay, I'm lonely today. You look loneliness in the eye and you say, today, right now, I'm lonely. There are people who have a certain attitude. I'm never feeling bad, I'm always doing great. There's nobody who is always doing great. There's nobody who always has only good times. You also have bad times. The first step is radical acceptance. That sounds so obvious, but it's not. Today I might be lonely. Today I just feel wounded. Just to feel it. I'm hurting right now, that this party was cancelled. I'm hurting because those two teamed up and I'm alone now. It really hurts. It won't kill you to feel that. The second step is more advanced. And I am talking to myself first in all of this. But I want to trust you to handle this, because it's a truly hefty statement. There's two parts of the Bible, the Old Testament, which is the Holy Scriptures of Israel, and the New Testament, the stuff about Jesus. And in the Old Testament there's the prophets, authors who heard from God and wrote it down. And one of them is Jeremiah. In chapter 17 of the book of Jeremiah, God speaks through the voice of the prophet. Chapter 17, verse 5. Cursed is the man who trusts in men, who leans on weak flesh, and whose heart turns from the Lord. He's like a barren bush in the desert, which never sees rain. He stays on salty ground where no one lives. And then it says, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, and whose confidence is in him. He is like a tree planted by the water and whose roots stretch out into the banks. He has nothing to fear when heat comes. Even in a dry year, he is without worry, for his leaves stay green. What does this picture mean? I would like to first say something about this word cursed. You might think, cursed? That sounds harsh. It basically means that this is a life model that brings forth bad things. So what's the life model that brings forth bad things? A man who trusts in other humans. And maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, are we not supposed to trust other people ever? Should we walk around all skeptical in the world? I never trust anyone? What part of that could be good? Okay, it's probably not meant as simple as that, but it's using a picture. And the picture is a person who is held in God, who trusts in God. He is like a tree who has roots in the ground, and so they have water access. So it's also secure in times of a drought. And I'll apply that to social life. There are dry years. During COVID, we had millions of people who suffered under extreme loneliness, totally devastating loneliness. But even without COVID, you often don't have it in your hand what happens around you. Whether you're meeting great people or can't find friends in a group, if a relationship breaks or not, we don't have those things in our hands. Or you might have to move for your job, you're in a new city and feel like you don't know anyone. And you're like a tree that stretches its roots out for the water and can't find any. And I think that's sort of how this image, how it's being used here. The person who hopes in other people as their source will always be disappointed. That's quite a statement. When you're lonely, you usually think my solution is another person. If only I had a best friend, I have no best friend. If only I had a girlfriend, I have no girlfriend. If only I had better colleagues, my co-workers are bad. I never find connection. So we think the solution is out there, and the problem is out there. And if I interpret these Bible passages right, it says, that exact life attitude will make you feel like a tree on a salty soil in a desert where there's no rain. I find it sobering and deep. I'd say there's a lot of wisdom in this. The more I try to be cool, recognized, at the center of society, popular, and to have many contacts, the more I become dependent on outside approval. But also the more empty I become on the inside. If I don't have a stable stance in my own being, where I am personally rooted, I think actually this applies whether you believe in God or not. The Bible says the deepest root we can have is the relationship to God. I believe that even if you didn't believe in God, it would still be true that it's healthier to be rooted in the self rather than looking for approval in the opinion of others. And that's a hard and difficult lesson. I have 3 points. The first point was, if you feel lonely, feeling the emotion won't kill you. Stop running, slow down a little and look at it. The second is a hard lesson. In what way do you have your roots stretched out to the outside approval, where you expect people to give you what they can't give? And if you do that and realize, wow, I'm suddenly like a tree in the desert and there's no rain anymore, then that could be a prompt to think, maybe I need to dig deeper and not put my roots in the air outside. Because there's a level of loneliness in you that no other person can reach. No matter how happy your relationship with your spouse, your kids or friends, it only reaches to a certain point. And I'm so grateful for good friends I have, and for my marriage and kids, I'm so rich because of them. But there's a certain point in the heart of man, in your heart, where no other person can reach, because you're always deeper than your social identity. There's a secret inside of you, a secret place, like a secret garden, if you want this picture, or which I believe that it's the place where God wants relationship with you, where the divine you is waiting for you. And that's my third and final point.
Have you noticed there are no ads on this channel? This is the only one. There's one reason for that. This channel is funded by donations only. If you want to help us to continue with this work, you find everything about supporting us below in the description. Now enjoy the rest of the video.
We humans are the only creatures who can say I. Animals don't do that. The stones don't say that. The prime numbers don't say it, or the Empire State Building or Mount Everest. We humans say I. But we humans learn how to say I through a you, through relationship. That means we humans can only say I if we can also say you. And the last question is there an eternal you for this I or not? Because this I will always stay partially lonely. You can never fully express yourself to another person. The question is there an eternal you for the I? I think there is. The experience of a praying person is that there is a you. In the Bible, there's a whole book full of prayers in it. It's called the Psalms. And there's one Psalm, 139, where the writer says, God, you have searched me, and you know my innermost being. You even know my thoughts before I know them. And before my words are even on my lips, you already know what I'm going to say. And he says, to know this is too wonderful for me. He is amazed that there is this intimacy towards a godly you. And friends, that's also my experience. That's my personal experience. I said once many years ago when I was still a student, alone one evening in Munich with my guitar, and I wrote a song. It says, I never found such a love as yours, and nothing can comfort me like a gaze from you, my silent companion in lonely hours, my friend you are to me. I believe that a walk with God won't spare you from loneliness. There's always lonely times. And God isn't the one who always takes that away. I wish it were so, but He sometimes proves Himself to be the silent companion, even in these dark times. Often you only realize it looking back, where you look back and say, I wasn't fully alone. Someone else was there with me. There was this divine, godly you. And my wish for you is that you discover that. If we can trust those praying in the Bible, David and those who wrote the Psalms, then they experience things like in Psalm 9, verse 10, he prays, "Thus the Lord becomes a fortress for the oppressed in time of need." Imagine you were being oppressed and are in need, then you have an inner fortress where you can run to, where you can hide. Therefore, those trust in you who know your name. For you, Lord, leave nobody who looks to you. Psalm 9, verse 10, God leaves no one who looks for him. And there are those times that feel God forsaken. And there's also times where we recognize, okay, even when I felt abandoned, God was still there, and he still didn't let me fall. Or once the psalmist even prays, I find this so challenging, though father and mother might leave me, the Lord will take me in. My father and mother haven't abandoned me. I had a pretty good relationship to both of them. But perhaps your parents literally left you, or maybe you remember a situation as a child where you thought my parents don't care what I'm saying, or my dad, I don't even know him, he took off. My mom, that was more a cold distance, not a real close warmth. And it's pretty intimate how the psalmist prays, even when father and mother leave me, the Lord will take me in. And that brings me to the last point. It's the deepest one, and I believe it's also the point Franz Kafka was trying to make. We humans have loneliness wounds in different measures, but these kinds of wounds often come from back in childhood. This experience, even with sheltered homes and good parents, to not really have a home for the heart, to not have an anchor, not to be loved for who you are, to not really find an open ear. That is what truly wounds us in a deeper way than anything else, because we humans are created to have deep relationships. And it deeply moves me that the psalmist prays, if father and mother leave me. It touches me that the message of Jesus talks again and again of the Father. Or you could say a home, if you have issues with the idea of the Father. Jesus uses the word Father, but maybe you have bad associations with that. However, he also often speaks of home, of coming home, and deep down we are, like Franz Kafka says, like kids who got lost in the woods. And the question is, does your heart have a heart home? Is there a father? Is there a mother? Is there a home? Or is there nothing? And in the end, only you can find that out. And the first step is to recognize that no other person can satisfy that need. The more you try to force it from your partner, or that finally your friends would take care of it, the more you will overwhelm the people around you. That is something no person can give. And you can ask yourself questions to lead to the center. You can ask questions like, where did you know that feeling in childhood? That goes a little into psychology. I'm not a psychologist. There's plenty of other talks and books about that. But where did this feeling enter your life? And with it the lie that you are alone and nobody cares about you. And what strategies have you developed in order to deal with it? And the first step is to acknowledge, well, this lonely feeling I have, it's not my partner's fault that I feel this way. Maybe nobody's at fault. But now you're an adult, and now it's not mom's job to come, or dad's job, or whoever it was. Rather, now you yourself are responsible for what you do with your loneliness. And what you do when you're alone is the key. Jesus chooses to confront it with loneliness in the desert and then throws himself on God. Paul is an impressive preacher in the New Testament. He was executed under Emperor Nero for his faith. That means he wasn't afraid and no resistance was too great. He wasn't a superhero where we might think, well, he always felt great. Instead, he writes at one point, at the beginning of 2 Corinthians, he says, I was really done with life. A good co-worker had left me and I was so sad, and this moves me also. He too knew loneliness, being betrayed. But then he says in 2 Corinthians 1 verse 3, "Praise be to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of all mercy and the Father of comfort." And then he says he comforts us in our need, so we can then comfort others. And I find it so beautiful. Paul says God is the Father of all comfort, and in the measure in which he lets God comfort him. Side note, through the dark times, he still isn't spared dark times, end note. He gets the strength to comfort others. Friends, if you feel totally lonely right now and feel horrible, then these words might still sound like honey. I don't know how you feel right now. It's really like Franz Kafka says, you can't look from the outside into another person. But I truly wish for you that you meet the Father who invites you to come home to him, that you experience this in a deep place. And feeling abandoned and lonely is what God himself knew about. One of Jesus' last words, the human Son and God at the cross, is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was abandoned by his best friends, and he even felt abandoned by his Father. But do you know why? To bring you home. So you never again need to feel like the lost child in the woods. And even if there are times where you have flashbacks of the past, wow, it's just like in elementary school back when I was laughed at, just like with my parents when they sent me out because I didn't behave. And you suddenly have these thoughts, a carousel of emotions. Then you can press stop, feel it, take responsibility, and say, okay, Jesus, you've been driven from the city, crucified outside the city, spit on as a shameful person, and rejected, betrayed, and sold, left alone by your best friends. And you even felt abandoned by your Father. So I never need to feel that way. So you can take me home to the Father's house. And this is an experience you can have. It's not just theory, something you need to believe like a faith creed, but it's an experience that only you yourself can have. And it's my wish for you and my prayer for you and also for me. It's a lesson that never ends. You don't just check it off a list once. It's a deep human topic. But there is hope through the loneliness. And I just want to encourage you, don't give up. Keep going. And I believe that people will also enter your life again. We also need people. We're allowed to let people get close to us. Even if solution isn't in people in the last sense, rather it's in taking responsibility and taking our loneliness to a place where it can be filled in a good relationship with God, and also a good relationship to ourselves, where we can accept ourselves and our own emotional pain, and we can look at it and learn how to deal with it in a good way. Whatever your experience with loneliness or your thoughts, I'd be happy if you just share them in the comments below. If that isn't too personal for you, if you like, and I wish you a lot of strength and all the best. There's a list of other talks on my channel. One is titled When the Soul Cries. You will find several things where it talks about similar topics several times, because they are deep human themes. And my wish is that you don't beat yourself up. You probably aren't doing anything wrong if you're lonely. It might not be your fault. But it's something that we humans carry around as a package. But we can learn how to deal with it in a good way. And then you will no longer just be a tree planted by the water, but you will also offer others shade in difficult times. And that's my wish for you. God bless you.